I'm usually pretty loud. People don't say that I'm a quiet person. Can everybody hear me? I can use the mic if you need me to. All right, well, first, my name is David Balat. Thank you so much for having me here today. I really enjoy these kinds of forums. Much more than the debates. I'm very comfortable in the debates, but these are more enjoyable. I have some material on the table. It's a lit piece where you can learn a little bit about me, but I have a website where you can learn more information. That's davidbalat.com, and my WeChat is the same. It's davidbalat.com. I've been endorsed by the Texas Asian Republican Club, and one of the things that they said to me very early on was they said, David, Asian values are conservative values, and they saw me as one that shared in their values, and that's why they threw their name and their support behind me. I'm a native Houstonian. I was born in Houston, but my parents immigrated to this country, so I'm a first-generation American. They immigrated here from Israel, but I'm not Jewish. I'm Christian. Mom is Greek and Jewish, and Dad is Italian. Their family immigrated to Israel, and then they immigrated here. So I'm a Mediterranean mutt, is what I tell people. But I really got to see firsthand the American dream. My parents, my dad, I'll tell you this as well, not only were they immigrants with very little means, my father was also deaf and mute. He was born that way. He couldn't speak or hear. And so he had a big disadvantage. But one thing that he had in his country, his parents put him in an apprenticeship because they didn't have schooling to address his needs. So he became a tailor when he was a small boy, and that's what he learned to do, and he became a master tailor. And when he came here, he worked 3 jobs. You know, the joke in our family is, in the family album, when you used to have an album with pictures, you don't see my dad till I'm 8 years old because he was always working. But he worked because he was saving his money because he wanted to have his own business. I mean, that's the American dream. He wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so that's exactly what they did. Mom and Dad started their own business in Garden Oaks. It's Chris's Alterations. And they are the picture of income mobility in this country. You know, I hear people on television and in the news, they say, you know, it's terrible because if you're poor, you'll always be poor, and if you're rich, you're just going to get richer. That's absolutely not true, because in this country, you have the opportunity to be what you want to be. With education, with perseverance, with hard work, you can have, that's why they call it the American dream, because people achieve it. Speaking of education, I stayed in Houston. I went to U of H. I worked my own way through school. I worked in hospitals ever since I was 16 years old. And I apologize for whoever I had the conversation with. Maybe it was Helen. Tuition was much more affordable. $1,000 per semester, and then another $500 for books. So that was something that a young man could afford at the time. It's not what I'm paying. Right? My daughter's in college right now. It's nowhere near that amount of money. It's much higher. But I ended up getting my undergraduate, and I have 2 master's degrees. I have an MBA, and I have a master's in healthcare administration as well. And I worked with Sisters of Charity, the memorial system, all the big systems in town. And I've had a number of my own companies where I was a consultant, and I would help people improve their businesses. And most recently, I've been a hospital turnaround specialist, where I go into distressed hospitals that are on the verge of going into bankruptcy. And you know, as you may or may not know, if somebody goes into bankruptcy, there's no coming out. They're liquidating and it's gone. So they bring me in to save their hospital, their business. And we do that with a high degree of success. And I'm very thankful for the career that I've had. But what I've seen in my career is government involvement to such a degree that they are the ones contributing to these hospitals failing. In any one of my hospitals, I have no less than 35 different regulatory agencies that accredit, certify, or license some aspect of my hospital. And I have to hire full-time people just to manage that process, a lot of them, and very high paid. That's only one aspect of the cost that's incurred because of government involvement. But healthcare is something that I'm very passionate about, and I've gotten involved in my community here in Houston to provide affordable healthcare. And it can absolutely be done, but it has to be done separate and apart from the government. And I'd love to be able to do that at the national scale, and that's why I'm here today. I want your support and your vote. If you live within my district, I'd love to have a conversation with you. I have a healthcare plan on my website called Freedom Care. It is a free market approach to how we can make healthcare affordable again. And these are the things that I want to implement at a much larger scale. Something else that's important to me. You know, I mentioned that my daughter's in college, right? Something that is a concern to me as someone who had parents come to this country and someone who understands that we have a right to speak our minds. I look forward to meeting Mr. Kulkarni. We've not met yet, but I've been looking forward to this because this is an opportunity for us to express our values and our views and our ideologies. And we can do it in such a way that we can be agreeable while disagreeing. That's something we've lost in this country. And it's something we've lost on college campuses. It's really scary that my daughter doesn't feel free to express her viewpoint or her faith, because she will be ostracized, and there's no tolerance for her viewpoint. This is America. We have the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech, and those are things that we need to make important again and bring back to a premier ideal. So those are things that are a concern to me. Something else that's an issue that maybe some of you share with me. I lived in Meyerland before the flood. Everybody know where Meyerland is or heard about it on the news? Yeah, anytime I say, they say, where did you live before you lived where you are now? I said Meyerland, and the response is always, ooh. And that was my response too. We lost our home.
By the way, some people call it Meyer Lake.
Meyer Lake. Well, it looked like a lake. That's how I met Wei, actually. He tried to buy my house. It was, we ended up having to be rescued from our home, and the fire department came and they brought us to the Army National Guard. We have an issue in this country, or in this city, with our infrastructure and with our mitigation of how we handle our flooding. There has been a great deal of neglect at every level of government. Federal, state, county, city. The Army Corps of Engineers fall under the auspices of the federal government. It's not just giving money, it's providing accountability for that group of individuals that are supposed to manage the reservoirs. The creeks, the bayous, the dams, the reservoirs themselves. The reservoirs, Addicks and Barkers. Do you know that the conservative estimate of soil at the bottom of the reservoirs was 20 feet? There are mature trees growing. They haven't been dredged in 40 years. Now, I'm not saying if they had maintained it, nobody would have flooded. We had 52 inches of rain. But could we have lessened the devastation to our city? Without question. So there was neglect, and there was absolute mismanagement when it came to our infrastructure in this city. So you've heard me hit on a number of issues, and I'm going to go into greater detail. But I'll stop there. I can go into the voting aspect if you'd like, or if we want to wait a little bit.
Yes, I think so. And actually, well, I have to confess myself that I wish I could have prepared better. And I spent some time actually last night Googling about what is primary elections about and so on. The more I read it, the more I'm confused, because the centerpiece of the information I got was primary election is an election, but it's not an election at the same time.
Right.
Because you don't actually elect any government officials. You elect the candidates towards the government officials.
That's right.
So that just makes the whole thing look like, primary election is not so important. So what's your take on this? Why do you think that Chinese voters like us need to participate more actively in primary as well?
Let me start with how they work, and then I'll move into why we need to be involved. Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
It's hard to hear that.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
Better? Oh yeah, it's better for me too. Unfortunately, we have a two-party system in this country, a Republican and Democrat. When you go to vote, you're voting for the Democratic nomination or the Republican nomination, depending on where you line up. So you are electing the best person to run in the general election against the person of the other party. Does that make sense so far? Okay. If I'm losing, you stick your hand up, and I'll say it a different way. Let me talk about my race. Ted Poe was a congressman for, I think, 12 years. I think 12 years. So it's an open seat. He's resigned. So there is no Republican incumbent. Now there are 9 of us running in that race. And there are 5 on the Democratic side. So we are all, we've had 10 debates. Since in the last one was this past Tuesday. So we're just talking about why we're different from the other. What do we bring to the table? Why should the voters vote for us to be the nominee for the Republican Party? And I'll say this, just as an aside. A lot of us are running because we're very disenchanted and unhappy with the Republican Party. We all see ourselves more as conservatives than as Republicans. And you might say, well, isn't that the same thing? Well, no, it's not. Not all Republicans are conservative. We believe in individual freedom, personal responsibility, and limited government. We want you to be the best versions of yourselves. And we want to give you the tools and create a fair playing field so that you can achieve what you want to achieve. That's conservatism in a nutshell. So on March 6th, which is coming up, that's election day, but we've had early voting that started this past Tuesday. So what you do is you go, and you can find out, you go to harrisvotes.com. harrisvotes.com. Harris like the county and votes. Go there and you click on polling locations and sample ballot. B-A-L-L-O-T, not like my last name. And it'll bring up a screen. And that screen, you'll put if you're registered to vote, it'll have a record of who you are. And you'll put in your address. And it'll tell you what your location is, and it'll give you a sample ballot. And on that sample ballot, you'll see who it is that, pardon me. You'll see who it is that will be running for the different offices that will be representing you. So Texas, it'll be on the Republican side, it'll be Senator Cruz and the people that are running against him. Mr. Kulkarni, I'm David Balat. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure. Come on back. The congressional, it depends on where you live. They're broken up by districts. Mr. Kulkarni is representing, or he's hoping to represent for Congressional District 22, and mine is for Congressional District 2. So you'll go and look, and what I encourage you to do is when you go to that sample ballot, go through the different candidates. Everybody's going to have a website. I would hope that they would. Everybody's going to have a website. Go look to see what they believe. And I would also encourage you to go to both Democrat and Republican. Look at all of them. See how you'll vote. If you're typically a Democrat, go. Open your mindset to say, let me see what these other gentlemen believe and what they say. And if you're Republican, do the same thing. Go look at the other gentlemen. You may not fall in line with their ideology, and that's okay. It's good to know and understand what people say. So, during early voting, there's a difference now. During early voting, you can go to any polling location. There's no restriction. And you'll go and wait in line, or there hasn't been much of a line lately, so it's actually better during early voting. And they'll say, which ballot do you want, Democrat or Republican? And they'll tell you, and they'll give you a little sticker with a number, and they'll let you go vote. If you wait till March 6th, you have to go to the location that's associated with your precinct. And that's a heavy day, so there will be a line. So again, I would encourage you to go to early voting. Did that help at all with the process?
Yes, sir.
Now, why should we vote as the Asian community? Let me tell you about myself. I have not been historically a great voter. That has not been something that I was very proud of, to be honest. And people would say, well, David, why are you running for Congress? You didn't vote consistently. And I said, you know what? I feel that I've been put in a place where I have a unique skill set that I want to make a difference for my country. And for the last year, I have immersed myself. I didn't dip my toe in the water. I jumped in. And I've seen people that have dedicated their lives to this process, and I admire what they do and the passion that they have. And I want to say to you today, if you've not been involved, it's okay. Today is the day that you can start. If you've not voted in the past, it's okay. Today is the day that you can start. Today's your day that you can make a difference.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
我想祝大家新年快乐我很高兴来这个会谢谢HCA 的工作恭喜发财因为David 不会讲中文，所以不客气。就讲 Okay, all right. So we'll speak in English from now on then. So my name is that wouldn't be very fair, would it? So my name is Preston Kulkarni. To give you a little bit of background about where I'm from and how I got here. I grew up in Houston. I actually was zoned to a high school called Sharpstown, if anybody knows. But I went to high school down in River Oaks on Westheimer, Lamar High School. I went on after high school to University of Texas, and then later on I went to Harvard for graduate school at the Kennedy School. I served for a year in the U.S. Senate as a foreign policy and defense advisor for Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. And I spent 14 years overseas as a U.S. Foreign Service officer in the State Department. So I served in Taiwan. Is anybody here from Taiwan? 2 people. I've also been all over the mainland, by the way. I've been to Beijing and Shanghai and Kunming and Chengdu and Guangzhou and Shanghai. After that, I went on to Russia. I served in Iraq. I served in Israel, and I served in Jamaica. And I was supposed to be serving in the Foreign Service today. The reason that I'm not is because I saw certain things happening in my government that were very disturbing to me as a citizen and as a person. What I mean by that is that I am asked to explain our policy overseas, and sometimes I disagree with our policy, but as a good public servant, I still explain it. I worked under the Bush administration, and I disagreed with some of their policies. I worked under the Obama administration. I disagreed with some policies. But I was always able to explain it. And I never claimed that America was a perfect country, but I believed in the values and the ideals that were represented by America. But certain things have happened in the past year or so that I could not explain. One of the examples was when last summer I was in Jamaica and the rally in Charlottesville happened. Does anybody remember this rally in Charlottesville? It was a rally to unite the white nationalists. And there was a fight in Charlottesville and a woman was murdered there. And the President of the United States went out and complimented the people who were on the side of the white nationalist rally. I was asked to explain this. I was in Jamaica, a majority black country, and they asked me to explain why my president was complimenting people at a white supremacist rally. And I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. Later on in November, there was a campaign for U.S. Senate. Does anybody remember this campaign in Alabama? There was a man named Roy Moore who said that people who weren't Christian should not be able to hold office in the United States, that our families were stronger when we had slavery. This is not something that has to do with whether you're a Democrat or Republican or whether you're conservative or liberal. These things just have to do with right and wrong. And I felt that I could not in good conscience continue to defend such things as an American and as a human being abroad. I decided that the only thing that I could do morally and ethically was to resign from the Foreign Service and come back here to serve in Congress. Because I think the most patriotic thing you can do when you see things happening around you that are immoral is to stand up and to speak out against them. My father was an immigrant to this country. He immigrated in 1969. And he always told me that I was just as American as anyone else. Doesn't matter what skin color you have, what country you came from, what your religion is, what your gender is. We are all Americans here. That's the ideal of America. That's something that all Americans should be able to agree on. And when we hear people talking about some countries being good countries and other countries being, I can't repeat the word, but S-hole countries, that's not what America is about. It's not what America is about to me, and it's not something that I can defend overseas. And we can't be an isolationist country. We can't cut ourselves off from the rest of the world. Some of the things that I've seen happen are very disturbing to me, just in terms of preserving our future for our children and our grandchildren. Pulling out of the Paris Climate Change Accords was a big step in the wrong direction. We all know what's happening to our planet right now. And if we go away from science, if we don't do anything about the climate change that's happening, it's our children and our grandchildren who are going to have to deal with the consequences, which will be irreversible. So for me, this campaign is about staying true to our values. Now, we may have some policy differences. There's always been differences on how high tax rates should be, for example, or what the specifics of immigration law are. But unless we get our values right first, then we can't even have a conversation. After the election in 2016, what I saw happening in my country was so much hostility, so much anger, so much bitterness on both sides that I didn't even recognize my country anymore. People ask me, is this campaign an anti-Trump campaign or an anti-Trump voter campaign? And I say, absolutely not. This campaign is a pro-America campaign. And what I mean by that is, if we agree on these fundamental values, we should be able to talk to each other and especially listen to each other. After the election, I felt like, not that my candidate had lost, but that my identity had been attacked as a citizen of America and as a human being. And I didn't know how to react. My friends who had voted the other way in the election, I would look at them and ask them, how could you do this to me? How could you espouse such views that were completely anti-American? And what I realized is that we saw things so differently, and we hadn't really been listening to each other. So what I did was I asked a Republican colleague of mine, rather than being caught in this echo chamber of social media where we tweet at each other and just say nasty things all the time, why don't we start a group where we get together around a table and we just have a meal once a week? We look each other in the eye and we listen to each other. We ask each other, where are you coming from? We try to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. We call this group Breaking Bread. And we did it in Boston, we did it in New York, we did it in DC. I even went down to Florida, and the guy who hosted the Breaking Bread in Florida was someone I had been talking to for 9 months online. And he's a Trump supporter. He hosted it, and we had a group of people from Indivisible there. And afterwards, after the Breaking Bread meal, he said, I still don't think I made the wrong decision with my vote, but I wish you were here in Florida, because if you were, I would vote for you. And I thought that was a bit surprising when he said that to me at first, but it made me feel optimistic about our country going forward, that we don't have to be in these bitter partisan rivalries all the time. We don't have to be hyper-polarized. We don't always have to be constantly attacking each other here. He's actually posted on my Facebook wall, he's told people, I'm not usually supportive of any Democrats, but I ask you to support this guy because he has character and integrity. And I think that's what we need to get back to in this country. We need to get back to a place where we can disagree about things. I don't have to agree with you on every single issue to trust that we both have America's best interests at heart, that we have each other's best interests at heart, that we care about the same things that bother each other. So for example, all of us should agree that healthcare costs are too high. We should all want to bring down healthcare costs for our families. All of us want to make sure that our children are well educated, that we have a strong public education system. Most of us move into neighborhoods, especially in the Asian community. We move into neighborhoods specifically because we want our children to be well educated. So if the public school system is being threatened, that's a threat to all of us, no matter what party you're from. All of us should want our children to be safe. Now, this is a particular area that's very sensitive, especially in a week like this, but honestly, this has happened so many times in the last few years. If anybody remembers, does people remember when Columbine happened?
1991, is that right?
No, I think it was 1999. It was late 90s, yeah? I was in college at the time, and I remember thinking that this was the most horrible tragedy that could occur in a high school in the United States. And unfortunately, I was wrong, because now it keeps happening again and again and again. This past week, we had to watch again as parents were burying their children.
Maybe because the Gun-Free Zone Act?
Because of what? Say again?
Gun-Free Zone Act.
Well, I think the basic thing that we should agree on at the beginning is that we all want our children to be safe, right? If we can agree on that.
Okay, sorry, no further questions now. You can write on here. I already have it. Yeah.
Well, so I mean, but it's a good point. It's a good point. This is the kind of thing that we're talking about, right? First, let's figure out what we agree on. We all agree that we want our children to be safe. Nobody wants to bury their children. Nobody wants someone else to have to bury their children, right? If we can agree on that, then we can sit down at a table and talk to each other, despite our differences. How many people actually in the audience are gun owners? So we have, yeah, about like one third of the audience are gun owners. Obviously, many people in Texas are gun owners. Many people across this country are gun owners. Nobody wants to take away someone's guns. Nobody wants to disarm people who are legally expressing their rights. Nobody wants to threaten the Constitution or the Second Amendment. What people want is for their children to be safe. And I think that's something that anybody can empathize with. All of us. How many people are parents in the audience? How many people have children? Okay. The majority of the audience has children. So that doesn't divide us, whether we're gun owners or not. And the thing is, if we can take the politics out of these issues, the partisanship out of these issues, and start from that fundamental basis, if we're all of the parents in this room want their children to be safe. Is there anybody who doesn't want their children to be safe? Let's start from that point. Let's sit down at the table and bring responsible gun owners together with people who are justifiably afraid for the safety of their children, and figure out how we can make these schools safer, how we can make sure that there is not another Parkland, that we don't have to watch our children being buried again. And honestly, I'm very impressed that the students now are actually taking responsibility for themselves. I'm extremely impressed with these teenagers who are taking on leadership roles and saying, this is what I want for myself. Don't tell me what I need in my school. I want to be safe. I'm speaking out now because I was running from a man who was shooting at me in my school. Has anybody actually had an experience with gun violence? Has anybody seen it? So, I don't know, maybe you might want to talk about your experience in a minute. I've had gun violence. I've been in a restaurant when there was a gun battle in front of the restaurant. My mom was out in the car. My neighbors across the street from me were murdered in their own homes. My uncle was murdered in gun violence. When this kind of thing happens to you, it's very personal. And I think that kind of experience is something that we should all be able to empathize with, we should all be able to be concerned about as human beings. Let's take the politics out of it and let's talk to each other. And let's especially listen to each other to figure out how we can solve these problems. And if some groups don't want to listen, well, let's talk to the people within those groups that are actually reasonable and moderate and want to do something about the problem, because there is a problem going on here. We know that there's a problem. And we can tell because other countries, like for example, Canada to the north, has 1/6 the rate of gun violence that we have in the United States. Australia has about 1/15 the rate. We have a serious problem here. And whenever I travel across the world, people always ask me, what's going on in America? Why do we keep killing each other? Well, one thing, we can't even research solutions to gun violence. We can't even figure out how to bring it down or what's effective and what's not, because the government is prevented from doing research on this issue. We need to have common sense solutions. When I talk about reason, compassion, and decency, the reason, especially for the Asian community, that should be at the top of the list. We should be basing our resolutions, our policy prescriptions on evidence. How do we actually do something about these problems? The same thing with climate change. We should be listening to our scientists. When scientists tell us that the climate is changing and the earth is warming, we see more and more natural disasters. This year was the largest year on record with the most expensive natural disasters, over $300 billion worth of natural disasters. Now we can say it's a Chinese hoax and it's all made up, or we can listen to our scientists and try to do things, effective things, to try and mitigate the problems. There are things that we all know we can do, and some things that we don't even talk about. You know, we always talk about hydrocarbons, but we don't talk about things like managing refrigerant use or land usage or waste management, agricultural management. All of these things have a measurable, quantifiable impact on our climate. And all of these things could be mitigated to try and protect the future for our children. Another issue that I'm sure a lot of people think about here is immigration. I actually issued 40,000 visas when I was in Taiwan. And I know firsthand that there are a lot of problems in our immigration system. There's problems at one end of the spectrum where we have people who are fleeing violence coming from places like El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala, where the rate of murder there is even higher than it is in the United States. In El Salvador, I think the rate of murder is over 150 per 100,000. So people who are fleeing violence, trying to make a better life for their children, are refugees. What do we do about these people? What do we do about people who are brought here as children? Someone who's been in this country since they were 10 years old, who has a wife and children, all American citizens, should we break up these families and should we send them home? Is that really their home? If someone has an entire family here, does it make sense? Is their home Mexico? At the other end of the spectrum, has anybody ever been on an H-1B visa here? A few people, right? The H-1B program, actually, as you know, was under threat, especially extensions of H-1B recently. And there's a lot of red tape in the program. We need a comprehensive immigration reform that actually makes sense and is efficient. And I've seen absurdities in the immigration system from my own experience. One that I remember all the time that really, I just couldn't come up with any explanation for it. It was one where a woman came in to apply for a visa for her infant. And I said, well, where's your visa application? She said, I've got my green card. What had happened was that she got her immigrant visa issued while she was pregnant. Her baby was born. After that, the baby came into the United States with a stamp in their new passport. But when she got here, she realized that her husband had a new job. She didn't have any support network around her, so she went back to Taipei for 2 months to be with her mother until her husband got settled. Well, guess what happened? Once she had gone back to Taipei, her baby couldn't get that stamp again. And her baby was stuck in Taiwan until the baby could apply for its own green card, which was a year and a half later. And I tried to find out every way I could around that situation. And there was nothing I could do. So this woman had to choose between her husband and her child. Those are the kind of things that I'm talking about. There's absurdities in the immigration system. So we need to be thoughtful, we need to be reasonable, we need to be compassionate and decent in our immigration system, in our healthcare system, in our taxation system. Every single policy that we have should be based in some kind of morals and some kind of ethics. That's where we should start from. If we can agree on these basic principles, that we have values, then we can talk about where we disagree. That the founders of this country did not expect us all to agree. What they expected is for us to come to the table with very vigorous disagreements and resolve those differences at the table and come up with laws and rules for this society that help the greatest number of people. That's the kind of campaign that we're running. That's what we want to do. There's actually a caucus in Congress called the Problem Solvers Caucus, where every single member, if 51% of the Republicans and 51% of the Democrats agree on something, that entire group votes as a block, so that we don't have things where we shut down the government. You don't have one group trying to hold the rest of the country hostage. But unfortunately, there are no people from Texas. There's no representative from Texas at all in the Problem Solvers Caucus. I've already said that if I'm elected to Congress, I'm going to be the first member from Texas in the Problem Solvers Caucus, because we need to be able to work for our entire country and not just for a few or not just for the special interests.
So you have about 2 minutes left.
Gary, is 10 minutes?
It's actually 17 minutes.
He has 17 or
No, he got like 13 minutes more.
You have about 10 minutes.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about some of the specific issues then.
So I think 30 minutes one, 30 minutes another one.
We have to make a change because the format was 10 plus 20, and since Mr. Kulkarni arrived late, and that's why I gave him like
Because
we
he's
combined
late,
two
he
slots
needs
together.
to take the responsibility and let the other one talk now.
You know, I actually think it's fine. Like, I'm fine. Like to make this a little bit more interactive.
So to make it easy, I'll
Yeah.
allow him to take that time to do what he needs to do.
I feel too much.
Yeah, it's fun. Why don't we do the second?
guys okay with that?
Yeah, I'm totally there. Let's. We're here. Like honestly, we're here for the voters. What the voters want. If they want to listen, they want.
If you guys don't have a problem with that,
Yeah, absolutely.
go with that. Okay.
Talk about superiority.
Okay, let's watch out.
Yeah.
They started talking about
It's just fairness.
girls.
Okay.
Wait, they started
sit
talking
here.
about 110, so we became half an hour. Okay, and
Being late.
No, it's fine. Like it's for voters. Yeah.
Okay. So then now you have, as the program has been originally designed, and Dave has 20 minutes to. Sorry. Okay. When I'm talking, you don't talk. Okay. And it's very impolite to other people, by the way. So Dave, you have 20 minutes to share your views on different policies of your choice. You have 20 minutes time. Then after that 20 minutes, and we already have some questions we can ask both of you guys. And also, we also expect you to share your views on the other candidates' topics that you don't plan on covering.
Well, and I was planning on doing that. I made some notes while Sri was speaking, and what I felt was going to be the most effective for this time that we're given is for me to share along the lines of what he spoke about to give you my viewpoints. So that way you'll have an apples to apples, one-to-one comparison. Regardless of the issue, as Americans, we need to look at everything through the lens of the Constitution. We're running for a federal position. And we have a job description. If you go to the Constitution, you go to Article 1, Section 8. Those are the enumerated powers of Congress. And that is the scope through which we're able to do the things that we want to do for the benefit of the American people. And a number of these issues do not fall within that scope. And it's not just Democrats who are guilty of going outside of the scope, it's Republicans as well. Healthcare does not fall within that list of items in the Constitution. And we've seen entitlements by George W. Bush, and we've seen every president since FDR and even before him has had some kind of healthcare initiative that they've wanted to implement. But healthcare is just not there. It is not the role of the federal government. And what it says there at the end of Article 1, Section A, is that for anything not covered in those rules or in those enumerated powers is then delegated to the states. It's the states' responsibilities to pick up education and healthcare and climate change. And why? You know, as a healthcare executive and hospital CEO, my primary service area for a hospital is 1 mile to 2 miles. That's my community. How on earth is Washington, D.C. going to do what's best for my community when they're so many miles away? They don't know what the needs are. They've not done a needs assessment. They don't know what the predominant disease states of many of the people that are within my hospital are. I can best deal with it. With education, I can best deal with my children. Where we differ is, I think it's important that we have competition among the schools. Let me give you a great example. My son, we initially had him in private school, and in 2nd grade, we were called in by the teacher, and he had some poor grades. And we all know this. Being a child of immigrants, education is very important. I was slated to be a doctor. My career was chosen for me the day I was born. It just didn't work out for mom and dad. And so I was very hard on my child. I was tough on my son, and I just didn't know that he was having struggles. So what we did, private school was not going to give him the help that he needed, so we homeschooled him. We brought him home. We still couldn't address the fact that he couldn't read. And that was heartbreaking for me as a father. And one day my wife was at the park, and a lady said, "You should take him to a diagnostician." And we had him tested, and Turned out he was severely dyslexic. He had severe dyscalculia, which is dyslexia but for numbers. And he had severe dysgraphia. He was severe in 3 categories. And I said, what can we do? How do we deal with this? I know he's smart. He tries to get away with stuff all the time. He's creative in trying to get out of his chores and do things that he's not supposed to do. He's smart. He's intelligent. He just can't do the things that other kids can do. And they said, well, the Cadillac around the world is a school here in Houston called Briarwood. But it's very expensive. I mean, I've been blessed. I was able to provide the tuition. He's able to read. And not only that, he's currently a junior at Bel Air High School, big rival of your old high school. And he has a 3.4 GPA in college prep level classes. I'm extremely proud of my son. But not everybody has the ability to do what I did. Not everybody had the means to be able to do so. Why are you penalized as someone who doesn't have the means? That you might be poor. Does that mean because you don't have the means to do it, does that mean you love your children less? No, of course not. That's your money. You should be able to direct it how you want for the benefit of your children. DC does not need to manage our child's education. That's how I feel about that. It should be relegated to the parents and at the highest level to the states. But as far as safety, let me touch on that point. Yes, we want our kids to be safe. I wholeheartedly agree. We want to keep our families safe. But the remedy that is being espoused right now is not a remedy that makes sense. It's reactionary. And if it was really something that folks on the gun control side really believed in, they would have taken those actions when they had 60 votes in the Senate, and when they had the House, and when they had the presidency. But it wasn't done. So a lot of this, unfortunately, is we're politicizing a tragedy, and it really shouldn't be the case. We need to look at mental health initiatives. We need to talk to our kids about dealing with each other. We have right now, social media has created a societal rot. And we have a lot of digital lions that sit behind keyboards and are mean and ugly to each other on Twitter, as you had described. That adults, we're to blame as well. We're not being very good role models for them. We need to be civil, and we need to teach that in our society. But we absolutely want our children to be safe, and we want to be able to have some protections for them where they go to school. You know, I bought my wife something for her birthday here recently, went to a little jewelry store. It was a little bitty store, but there were 2 armed guards. Aren't our children more important than jewels and jewelry? I think so. As it relates to climate change, that wasn't something I was going to discuss, but just a couple of points. As I told you, I was hit extremely hard by Harvey. I'm very sensitive to that storm. Scientists have said that all of the effects of 2017 cannot be attributed to climate change. We just had some weather patterns that were just not great for us as a country. But again, climate change that should be pushed to the private sector and to the states. Again, we look to see what our responsibility is. What is our job description? When we go, if elected, and we put our hand on the Bible and we say, I swear to take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, we have to understand it. We know that is it is limiting in what it is that we can do. And what we can't do, we need to give the states the power to do that for the good of their people. What else did we discuss? Immigration. I'm first generation as well. My parents immigrated into this country. And in terms of DACA, my parents worked very hard to become citizens. They're very proud to be Americans. They stood in line, they paid their dues, they studied. Because they wanted to be here. They wanted to be Americans. What it says in the Constitution, again, you have to keep going back to the fundamentals, is that Congress shall establish a uniform rule of naturalization. We need to have proper immigration policy. We don't have something right now that I think is in the best interest of those that want to come into this country and contribute as productive citizens of this nation. We make it very hard for those that want to come here and very easy for those that come here illegally. And that just shouldn't be the case. But my mother's response, I'll give you this on the DACA amnesty debate, is she says, David, it really, to me, seems as if it's a slap in the face, because why should they have amnesty when I did it the right way? I think it's fine to give them a legal status and have some kind of pathway, but they don't get to skip in line for those that have done it the proper way. There are options that are in place and that should be in place, but that's incumbent upon Congress, and they are kicking the can down the road, Republicans and Democrats alike. And shame on them, and I think we share that in common. We don't like what's going on in DC. Him on his side, me on my side. And we want to go there to make an effective change. And healthcare. I talked a little bit about healthcare, but I'll repeat that. How much time do I have, by the way?
You have 11 minutes.
Okay. If you look, let's look at history. There was, even since 1931, and then again in 1945, and then 1948, there was an effort to have universal health care. They've been talking about it for nearly over a century now, close to a century. But what really happened, and the cost of healthcare was always like this, from the 30s all the way to the mid-60s. And then in 1965, you see an exponential curve. The cost of healthcare increased significantly to the point that it is now unaffordable. Why? Two reasons. Well, it's multifaceted. Government's involved in it. Government trying to fix a problem that they think exists and then creating unintended consequences that create problems that are worse than the problem they thought they had in the first place. How often do we see government doing that? And what happens is when you create so much regulation in industry, you create something called corporatism. So big companies become bigger and they force out the smaller organization, and there's less competition. And what happens when there's less competition in an industry? Prices go up. We've gotten away from a free market. People have said, well, we went to Obamacare because the free market didn't work. No, we haven't tried the free market in ages. And I want to say something else. I hadn't brought up Obamacare before. Obamacare wasn't the problem with healthcare. Obamacare was the attempt to fix a problem that was there before it was enacted. It just increased our debt and really didn't make healthcare affordable or caring for that matter. And I've seen that firsthand, to the detriment of patients, providers, and communities. But it was broken before the Affordable Care Act. And right now, we're hearing from many on the Democrat side that they want to have a single payer program, a Medicare for all or a Medicare Plus. And again, that's going to create bigger government, and it's going to create more of a deficit and more of a debt. And I've been to countries where they've had a single payer system. I've been to Costa Rica, where they've asked me to come help them get away from that certain pockets where they want to have a free market option. I've done that in Canada. I've done that in Antigua and in the Caribbean. What happens in a single payer system is that there is rationing of care, and people that are sick don't get to see the doctor, or they don't get the procedures that they need, and they're hurting. It's not a salve. It's not a solution that is one that is workable. And I certainly hope that we don't see it in this country. And I will work with everything within me to see that that doesn't happen, whether I'm elected or not. I think I touched on all those items. I'll defer this one. I'll defer the rest of my time.
Okay. The number one question I received from the audience is, I have to spend a minute to explain what that is about. Okay. There's a legislation that California has attempted to pass a while back. It's called SCA 5. And that legislation is about that in the school system, and all the parents are forced to identify that their children's ethnicity. And currently what we do is, you identify yourself either as Asian or Hispanic or white and so on, right? But under Asian, and they add a few more items, which makes a lot of us very, very uncomfortable. And that just, personally, I feel that I feel I was in the 1920s in Germany. Okay, so that one forces every parent to identify their children or themselves as mainland Chinese, Hong Kong Chinese, Taiwanese, or Korean, or Japanese, or like Southeast Asian. So, and it just reminds me of Jews when before World War II, they were forced to identify themselves as Jews or not. So, what's your take on that one? Okay. Well, because the reason why people are here, why we're very curious about this, California started this, then followed by a few like New England states like Massachusetts and others. So it's likely in the future similar things might happen in Texas or even over the country, like nationwide as well. And next is related. What's your take on affirmative action? Who wants to take the question first?
I'll take it. Wait, I went last. So
Okay.
You want to go? I'll let you go.
All right.
I apologize. Okay.
So I actually was just introduced to this legislation. I'm not an expert on this specific bill from California, but I will say this. I mean, for me, I think I agree with your perspective on this. I remember when I was in 9th grade, they were doing a census of the room and asking everybody to raise their hand by their ethnicity so they could count the number of black students, white students, Hispanic. And the count was off by one, and it turned out because I hadn't raised my hand because I didn't feel comfortable with answering that question. When I was in 9th grade, there was a Black History program in our high school, and each teacher had a choice of whether to take their kids to the Black History program or not. And my teacher said we weren't going to go to the Black History program, and I asked her why not, and she said because we're not black. And I said, excuse me? She said, we're not. All of us here are of European descent, except for you, Shri. What race exactly are you? And all the other students turned around and looked at me, and I was 14 years old. And I looked at her and I said, I consider myself part of the human race. So I still prefer that answer today. And so, yeah, I can't imagine a scenario where I would want students to have to identify themselves not only by race but by sub-ethnicity. I don't really see the basis for that. Now, affirmative action is a different matter. When I was younger, when I was in high school, I used to be very opposed to affirmative action. I thought, what's the point of all this? You know, the only kind of affirmative action you should have is based on economic circumstances. I started to change my perspective a little bit as I got older, and I looked into more of the history of governmental discrimination against specific communities in this country, and you realize that a lot of the specific patterns that we see in our country right now have to do with policies that were implemented by the government. So, for example, redlining. Does anybody know what redlining is? Yeah, basically, you know, certain people in certain areas. They're in those areas specifically because, you know, they weren't offered housing in these places. You wouldn't sell, or you wouldn't lease, or you wouldn't rent to people there. There's many policies over the history of this country that have led to certain circumstances in specific communities, and there's been a history of discrimination against certain communities that you can't just do away with in an instant. It ingrains itself into the society, and so you see what happens when you send out a resume, for example, with all the same qualifications, but you just change the name at the top, and you see very sharp differences in the rate of response. Affirmative action, at least good affirmative action, is meant to try and remedy some of those inequities, and it's not done by putting just a quota system on something. It's done by going out there and trying to recruit from certain areas. So, for example, in my high school, some of the African American or Hispanic students weren't encouraged as much as other students to even apply to be part of the honors program, the International Baccalaureate program. I have a friend who has an organization that literally specifically does that goes out and looks for students who could be in these programs. Maybe they have really good test scores, but they don't have the same support network at home, so you see their homework or their grades are bad. Or conversely, you know, they have really good grades, but they didn't have exposure to some of the same test preparation as someone else, or maybe they're missing something from their social and emotional support network, and finds those students and tries to give them opportunities, expose them to the same things that other students have. So I think affirmative action is a little bit of a different situation than the first case that you're talking about. And affirmative action done right is meant to try and bring out some of the diversity and make sure that all of the people who could be contributing to an organization or an institution are actually being exposed to that and being given those opportunities to do so. So, there you go.
Just to be clear, David, and you also have 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, thank you. I really don't see the difference. The thing that I love about conservatism is that we look at the individual. And too many times we see amongst the Democrats and sometimes amongst the Republicans, but predominantly more along the liberal mindset, is there is an objectification or a categorization of people or groups of people. And that's just not, I don't think that's American. We don't want to talk about the rich or the poor or the Asians or the Hispanics. There's beauty in saying, David, Helen, JJ, these guys, we want to make sure that you are the best version of yourselves. I completely disagree with them making a distinction amongst the different races amongst the Asian people. I think that's wrong. I agree with my colleague here. With affirmative action, if there had been, well, and I don't disagree, with what had happened in history, absolutely, but we're not there today. I don't believe that we're seeing the same kind of oppressions and problems that were there in the past, but I think it was Ronald Reagan that said, the closest thing to eternal life in the federal government is the government program. They just don't go away or die, even when there's no need for them any longer. So what may have been a reason for it to be there is not there any longer. And we've seen, especially with the tax cuts that have come about, the rise in employment amongst various communities that have had typically high unemployment rates. We need to do what's best for our economy and for our people to give them, if they have the motivation and the drive to do it, give them the ability to take care of their families and not have them rely on the entitlements. Everybody needs that help. Everybody at some point in their life, they need a hand extended to them to bring them up. A safety net is not a bad thing, but to have it be perpetual is not something that is appropriate, and it's damaging to the individual.
I think I have to ask a follow-up question. It's from this slip, but I think I have to rephrase it a little bit. So let me give it a try. And from my personal experience, I watched the 2016 Academy Award, and it was the most disturbing Academy Award I've ever seen. Because in that Academy Award, the whole theme of it is about equal rights. So it's about the blacks getting equal rights as whites and so on. But during that show, Mr. Chris Rock, I think that's the Chris Rock, he made a joke about the Asian boys. Like he said that basically he implies that all the Asian boys are like works in the iPhone factories, like that. And then a while after that, another actor, he made a joke about like Asians have little smaller weenies. So it just shocks me in a way that, when it comes to racial protection, if these people said something about African Americans, guess what happened? Everybody knows, right? It looks like Asians are always exceptions to that. So we're not protected. So living under the facade of being a model citizen, is that the way that we're supposed to be treated? What's your take on that?
All right, I'll take it first. That would give me time to formulate.
I'm proud to say I didn't watch the Academy Awards. We've gotten away from watching a lot of TV altogether. There's not much good content. And Sri brought this up, and I echo it. I think many people do. We want to live in a society where we are civil to each other. And I'm going to get to your point, but I want to tell a story. I've knocked on a lot of doors going and meeting people, and I'll oftentimes knock on the door of somebody who's of a different party. And those are actually my favorite ones to have discussions on. Because initially people will want to say, where do you stand on this issue? What do you believe? And the intent there is to get into an argument where there's a winner and a loser, and that's not really what I want to have done. I'll stop them right there and I'll say, look, I don't want to get into that, because we both know where we lie on both sides of the issue. But I want to know why you believe what you believe. Help me understand what your basic underlying premises are that got you there. I'm truly interested, and I am. And this is true of not just Democrats, but of Republicans too. Unfortunately, they don't have them. They don't have a why of what they believe. We're so in tune with talking points and things that we hear, and we just regurgitate them. We're not a thinking society. And I'll usually jump in and I'll say, well, let me tell you, may I tell you why I believe what I believe? And the response is usually, look, you're not changing my mind. I still disagree with you, but I've never heard anybody talk about it that way. And that's what Sri is doing with his Breaking Bread initiative. And I appreciate that, by the way. We need to sit down and listen and talk to each other. We don't need to objectify other groups. We don't need to indulge in stereotypes for the sake of comedy. It's not moral, it's not ethical, and it's not human. So shame on them. All those guys, I'm glad I didn't watch it. You've just confirmed the fact that I made a good decision. But again, what I said earlier, we are seeing evidence of societal rot. And we have to get back to the point where the family is important, our faith is important, our friendships are important, and we know why we believe the things that we believe.
So I know, I'm sure many people in this room, especially if you grew up here and went to high school here, you probably at some point had some kind of stereotype applied to you. One good example is people have told me, of course you're good at math because you're Indian. Asians are good at math and science. And there's a question, is that a good thing, this model minority? And I would say that we should be encouraging people not to be stereotyping anyone in any way, even if it's a good stereotype, because honestly, people would expect somebody from my ethnicity to go into medicine or into engineering or into software development. I know my relatives definitely did. And so, but that cuts us off from things. So for somebody like me to go into government service, to go and try to be a public servant, to represent my country abroad, that definitely wasn't the dream for the Indian minority. And I think that limits our kids, but also limits us as a society. We shouldn't be stereotyping any ethnic group, any gender, any religion, broadly speaking. And I see that not just in this example of the Academy Awards, but in our public leaders. In fact, I would hold our governmental leaders to a higher standard than to a comedian who's trying to get some laughs. There's some jokes that I find funny and some jokes that I find offensive, and I'm not necessarily going to find the same things funny or offensive as someone else. But when we have governmental leaders, we're supposed to be able to show the way, who are saying things like, I can't have a Hispanic judge, for example, be my judge. To me, that is a much, much bigger issue, because if that person is nominating our judges, how do I know that the person that they're nominating was chosen because of their qualifications instead of the fact that they are Anglo or Hispanic or African American, that they're not using that in their judgments about that person? When we start stereotyping people, we say, we're going to ban people of an entire religion, 1.6 billion people. I don't care what religion you have, but in every religion you have so many different versions, so many different sects, so many different interpretations of that religion. To start blanket stereotyping 1.6 billion people, to me, that's against the values of America, as I said originally. So, I mean, in answer to your question, I think that when we have people who are supposed to be role models, especially people that our children are looking up to, making these kind of gross stereotypes about people, as parents, we need to stand up and tell our children that that's not right. And as leaders, we need to stand up and speak out against those others and say, this isn't what our society is about.
Thank you, Bruce. Somebody advised me to stand close to the microphone so that everyone can hear. We still have half an hour until 3, but since we want to reserve 20 minutes for you guys to actually interact with people in private, so we want to guarantee that. So that leaves us another 10 minutes time. And so unfortunately, that's why that I'm not able to go through all these questions here. So I'll just pick one that's on the top. So that's the most common ones.
We started late. Can we go a little bit?
We only reserved room until 3, so somebody might ask us to go away. Okay, but you're welcome to stay longer if no one walks in to ask us to leave. Okay, so we still have 10 minutes time, and I'll reserve 5 minutes for each question. I'll pick 2 top ones, and so each of you will have 2 minutes to fill in your comments. So, all right, the first one is about immigration. So I know both of you touched on immigration quite a lot, and you might have something that one covered but the other one doesn't. So how about another couple of minutes time for you guys to actually address the issues that you think that you should have addressed earlier on?
Okay, is there a question or?
It's a topic of immigration.
I don't know that I have much more to say.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a specific question, why don't we answer the questions from the audience?
Actually, there are 3 or 4 questions all touching upon immigration. So one talks about generally immigration reform. The other one is about what do you think of the immigration system and immigration systems reform? Or there's what's your view on undocumented immigrants? Pick the ones you want.
Yeah, how about the
Gun control is the next one I want to ask about.
Do you all want to hear more about immigration? Have we touched on it enough, or is there something more specific?
Not enough? Not enough?
Okay.
That's enough. Okay, we move on.
Not enough.
Okay.
And what's your schedule afterwards? Do you need to run?
I do need to run.
I'll be around.
Okay. All right. Next one is the rebuild Houston after Harvey. And do you have any plans? I know that both of you have some complaints and criticism about current system. So do you have any plans on how to get it done? Okay. 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, it'll be quick.
I got to go back to the Constitution. Federally, we have the responsibility for ports in our nation. We have the largest port in the country, the Port of Houston. Our port represents 40% of the nation's gasoline. Our port represents 60% of jet fuel that's reserved for our military. You saw what happened after Harvey. Gas prices went up around the country. It makes an impact. So as Port of Houston goes, so the nation goes. What we've talked about and what I've heard about is the plans for a coastal spine that will prevent any more surge during a big storm to come into the Port of Houston to make an impact and damage those refineries and damage the infrastructure. What I'd love to be able to do as your congressional representative is to allocate enough funds that deal with the infrastructure and flood mitigation and tie it into the development of a coastal spine for the port. It's completely appropriate for our federal and congressional role, and it allows us to allocate and appropriate the money needed for the Port of Houston and for Houston proper.
Thank you.
So I don't know how many people were flooded out during Harvey. Anybody in here? So I was actually overseas during Harvey, but I remember during Tropical Storm Allison, my brother was in the car with my sister and her friend, and the water started rising so fast that the windows, water started pouring in, and they had to jump out of the car and otherwise risk drowning. And we actually were stuck that night. We all had to sleep on the floor of a stranger's house that we just found, that we'd never met before, because there was no way for us to get home. So I can understand personally the feeling of being flooded out of your home. I've met with families who are still out of their homes, even today, months and months after Harvey. Families who had not just water, but sewage going through their living room and their dining room. And can you imagine dealing with that? And at the same time, when they're trying to get relief from the federal government for things that honestly had a man-made component to them. So there's natural disasters, but there's also man-made disasters. So for example, in the Canyon Gate area near Cinco Ranch, there was a floodgate which was not opened at the right time, and so they ended up flooding both above and below the floodgate, storing water on people's property. And it was the responsibility of the Army Corps of Engineers. Not only that, for many of these people, they didn't know that they were in a floodplain because developers knew, and they didn't tell the residents. Basic information. For me, that's something that the government does have a responsibility in. There's some things that belong to the county, and some things belong to the state, but FEMA is under the federal government. The Army Corps of Engineers is under the federal government. And when you have the head of FEMA saying that we're not first responders, or that FEMA is broke, at the same time that we're doing gigantic tax cuts for $1.5 trillion, to me, that's not ethical or moral, to put these families in that position. I've gone out and spoken to these families, and these families are upset, and especially when you have representatives in Congress who won't even see them face to face. That's the basics. That should be job number one for any representative of Congress, is when your constituents are going through something like this, you need to go out and listen to them, speak to them, and take their concerns face to face. You need to be able to face your constituents. And so our representative wasn't doing that. That's what I'm going to do as a member of Congress. I'm going to make sure that I'm going out there and actually addressing people's concerns, and that we're making long-term plans. Some of these things have been studied before. There were several studies that knew that there was going to be flooding there if we got to this situation, but nothing was done about it. No long-term plans were made. And even now, people are talking about building a third reservoir, but it's investing in old technology, 50-year-old, sometimes 100-year-old technology. We're not really thinking about how to plan for the future using 21st century technology. You need to have a system that's able to pump out water. When the soil is soaked, it doesn't matter if you have a third reservoir, that third reservoir can overflow as well. So bringing in actual flood engineers who are looking at the situation, not from repairing a broken system, but from creating a new system that will never allow this to happen again, that's something that a forward-thinking government needs to do. And I disagree with my colleague that there's no responsibility for the federal government here. I think some of these problems are bigger in scale than what we can deal with on an individual level. You can do that. You can provide relief, and that lots of different organizations across the community have provided tremendous relief, tremendous charity for people who were stuck out after Harvey. But at the level that we're talking about, managing the entire flood mitigation system, there's a role to play for the government, both at the local, state, and at the federal level.
Thank you, sir.
I just want to make a clarification. If it came across at any point that I said the federal government is not responsible, I think I had said earlier on that the Army Corps of Engineers is absolutely remiss and negligent in their maintenance of the infrastructure within Houston. I'm fully committed to that statement, and I've said that many, many times over the last year that I've been campaigning. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Dave. To respect the candidate's time, Sri, I know you're busy, so do you have another 2 minutes time or 3 minutes time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay. Last question. As that's actually on the second place, gun control. I know both of you have talked about gun control, but do you want to spend another couple of minutes time to reiterate the key points?
Like I said, I think the issue on gun control is, it's not really a policy difference, it's a political difference. There are definitely certain policies that could help. And we know this because they've been effective in other places. I think responsible gun owners can agree that assault weapons are not needed. Does anybody here own an assault weapon? Yeah, we have two owners who own assault weapons.
First, you need to
No, it's
define
not assault weapon.
what is assault weapon.
A weapon is a weapon.
Yeah.
Not assault weapon. I was a soldier in the U.S. Army, and that was a weapon, not an assault weapon. If I use a chopstick to assault you, that's an assault chopstick.
I think you're referring to assault rifle, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the
I'm
assault
talking about,
rifle in the military, it's burst. It's got burst function.
Yeah.
That means you pull the trigger once and 3 rounds coming out. And in civilian world, you only pull once, and only one bullet coming out.
Well, I'll
That's
say
the
this.
difference.
I'll say this. I have a lot of friends in the military. I've served in Iraq myself. And people can disagree about what guns that they prefer to own, but we can all see the results when people who have access to these weapons are able to kill multiple people in a very short period of time. And it's tragic that we have to talk about these kind of things with children around, but children are in these kinds of environments where people are using assault weapons to murder many people in a row. I agree, in a war zone, some of these weapons are necessary. I personally can't think of a good example where I would need a high capacity weapon, semi-automatic weapon, to be used in self-defense or in hunting, for example. I'll say this. Whenever we talk about the issue of gun safety, and I want to say gun safety because people a lot of times associate the word gun control with taking away your weapons. Nobody wants to disarm people. But when we talk about gun safety, people say, well, the answer is always more guns. The answer is we put more guns in the hands of teachers. We arm people. Does anybody know who Chris Kyle was?
Yes.
The movie American Sniper was made about Chris Kyle. He's one of the best marksmen in American history. Chris Kyle was killed by a bad guy with a gun. Chris Kyle was a good guy who should have been able to defend himself. In the Parkland shooting, now we know that there was not just one, but several people who were armed who were not able or willing to do something about the mass murder going on in front of them. The idea that teachers need to go out and train themselves to be able to use weapons to defend against mass shooters. I don't know if anybody has ever been in a situation like that, but I think the burden on teachers is bad enough when we're taking away their ability to take their school supplies off as deductions, for example. To ask every teacher to go out and train with a weapon in order to protect their children, to me, that's not a reasonable solution. And I don't think any reasonable person really expects teachers across this country to become military officers or policemen and be able to fire a weapon at a moment's notice and shoot a intruder. There has to be some kind of more reasonable solution to save our children.
You know, the situation with Chris Kyle, he was mentoring people that had PTSD that had come back from war. The gentleman that he was taking to a gun range to help him with his issue was very mentally disturbed, and Chris Kyle unfortunately had a fatal wound at that point because the gentleman turned on him and shot him. Chris Kyle was giving back. And it wasn't that he was a bad guy, he was a mentally disturbed guy. But we have a mental health issue in this country, and that's what we need to focus on, not guns. And one area of significant disagreement I have with my colleague here is that our Constitution doesn't say anything about self-defense or hunting. It talks about our right to bear and keep arms, and that right not being infringed upon for the sake of the people being able to protect their republic from a tyrannical government. That's why that's there. It's not for hunting or self-defense. So we need to go back to our fundamentals again. Always, when, professionally, if I go into a business and I'm trying to turn it around, it's always about the basics. It's always about the fundamentals. We can't react emotionally to terrible, terrible situations, as bad as they are. We do need to do something, but we need to look at it and understand what the root cause is. And frankly, it's not the fact that this person has a gun or that person has a gun. It doesn't have to be a gun. It could be chopsticks. It could be a car. It could be an IED. It could be anything. People can weaponize all kinds of things. And if you take away their guns, they're going to do the same things because the heart of man is evil. And we need to do the things to address how we can improve upon the civility and morality in our country. Good parenting, like we see in the Asian community and in my community, in the Indian community. You have tabs on your kids. And we need to do a better job of that as a nation. we need to come together. Just like, you know, the beautiful thing about Harvey, I want to go back to that because it ties into this. Houston was a shining star in our nation. We saw communities coming together. The amount of time and money and effort that went into us helping each other was outpaced what the federal government did. And that's the way it should be. But it shouldn't be a disaster that causes that to happen. We need a change of mindset. I could keep going, but I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, David. I have to say both sides made some very good points, so I deeply appreciate that. So towards the end of today's event, and I want to let everybody know that HCA as a 501(c) organization cannot endorse candidates for any as an organization, but we strongly encourage everyone here to participate. Not only vote, we strongly encourage everybody here to actually participate in the voting process, as well as promoting the candidates of your choice. So that's why we have the rest 20 minutes left for the candidates to interact with the people here, so that you're free to do whatever you want, basically. So ask for help.